Hi there, it's Fred Sweet. Welcome to Guitar Media's 1970s Super PA video part 2. We're here today to take a look at this mostly stock original 8-inputter. So as you can see, we have our 31 band PV graphic equalizer here. We use this to boost the guitar. So we plug the guitar straight into the back of the unit here, and then we come out of the unit into the 24 volt worm here, and then we come out of the 24 volt electro harmonics worm modulation effect to the Marshall Super P.A.100. Okay, now we're over here at the Marshall Super PA. So out of the worm into the Super PA into channel 2, jump out of channel 2 into channel 1. Now we run the presence on 5 for this application. We run the bass all the way down, mid-range on 10, treble on 10, volume 1 on 10, and volume 2 on 10. So just real quick, this is our Variac unit here, and I'll zoom in so you can see where we're running. So we got it just about 100 volts there. So now that we've had a little bit more time with the amp, we've been able to match the output tubes a little better. And if you're like me and you don't want to pay a tech bill, you just want to go ahead and get it done yourself, what you can do is go to the local hardware store and pick up a 1 amp HT fuse. And this is just in case you have a short in one of your output tubes when you replace it. You'll be ready to go. And what we want to look for here is, as we're replacing the output tubes, we're looking for the tubes to light up evenly. So I get Dad to play the guitar, we crank the amp up, and as he's playing the guitar, we see the tubes lighting up and pushing and pulling a certain amount of current. And that's what we want to see, them all light up as evenly as possible. And this is an indication that we've been successful in matching the output tubes. Also, we listen for a little more bass response, as a good bass response is also a good indication that you've been successful in matching your output tubes. Here at Guitar Media, we've been on the hunt for the psychedelic sustain for many years now. And so pinch harmonics is not something that's hard to come by. You know, a lot of pedals and transistor amps, you can easily get pinch harmonics. But the psychedelic sustain, however, it's a lot harder to get. What this is it's a full sound. When you play single notes on a Stratocaster or a Fender guitar, a really thin single coil guitar, we're looking for a full sound when you play single notes for say a solo setting. We're looking for a full sustain of that note and an even sustained response up and down the register of the guitar, as well as possibly an octave sustain or a harmony sustain, and really just some soul and really being able to feel the guitar and getting the inspiration to play. And so in this search for the psychedelic sustain, we played the JCM 800 2203, which is the 100 watt JCM 800. We have found that the JCM 800 is a little bit, the voicing and the frequency response is a little bit thin. So at the end of the day, we find ourselves rolling the bass up on 10, running the bass up on 10, turning the mid-range down, turning the treble down, turning the presence down, and trying to really normalize the frequency response to be able to get a full sound, really cranking the amp up to really get the bottom to come up for a full sound with a Fender guitar. Now with the Super Lead is a great amp for a guitar player that wants to get the psychedelic sustain without the use of an additional boost. What they have in the Super Lead is sort of a built-in boost. There's a 0.68 capacitor going to ground on V1 on the lead channel, and this is actually a built-in mid-range and high-range boost. So you're going to get the psychedelic sustain right off the bat. And a lot of amps, we see an additional 0.68 capacitor in the mixer stage. What this does again is boost the mid-range and the high frequencies. And this is great for guitar players that want to plug straight into the amp and get the psychedelic sustain without an additional boost. However, the downside to this is that the frequency response, because it's boosted in the mid-range and high frequencies, it's just not a balanced frequency response. So you're going to find a lot of times when you get to certain registers, it's going to work a lot better here, not as good there, not as well balanced. And sometimes we can find it difficult with a lot of different guitars or modulation pedals because it's just not even. Well, so moving on to the Super Bass. The Super Bass is a great amp and a great way to get the psychedelic sustain. And we have found that by using a treble booster or a distortion or say a tube screamer, what this does is actually corrects and boosts the mid-range and the high frequencies. It corrects the frequency response for the Super Bass amplifiers. It allows us to get the psychedelic sustain. Also, the use of 15-inch speakers has also been a good way for us to get the psychedelic sustain with the Super Bass. However, once again, you're boosting it with something that's mid-range and high frequency. And so this kind of, once again, this kind of puts you in certain parts of the register are going to work better. It's not really quite as balanced. Now with the Super PA, what we find here is the 0.022 capacitors throughout the amplifier, and we have found a more balanced across the board in the audio spectrum frequency response. So while we still have to dial the bass back when we boost the amp, and we actually use a full range graphic equalizer to boost the amp, we have found that this is just more balanced and just a more of an even frequency response. All the way from the beginning of the register, from the bottom all the way to the top. And it finds itself, it's really just a bigger window to work with and just more even. So it finds itself more at home with more different guitars, more modulation pedals. It's just easier to get everything to work, and everything works just a little bit more evenly as we have more of an even and well-balanced frequency response. We have found at the end of the day that these EL34s, really the frequency response of the EL34, it's pretty much the same. Once you get it cranked up, once you get it doing its job, it pretty much just does what it does. And the same for these Vintage 30 heavy magnet Celestions with the 444 cones. You know, once you really get them cranked up, they do the frequency that they do. So it's not rocket science. Basically what I'm saying is it doesn't really matter how you get the job done. You know, once you get it cranked up, it's pretty much just going to work. And other than that, the 15-inch speakers, once again, the heavy magnets and bass cones are just going to help to fill out the sound for the psychedelic sustain. The purpose of this video series was to showcase the flavor of overdrive to come from the 1970 Marshall Super PA amp, as well as the possibilities and the full range of the frequency response available from this amplifier. And really the only way to do that is with so many different guitars, and we wanted to get a few more guitars in this video, but so many of these recordings came out so great, and I'm so glad that they did. And I was really honestly amazed at how the recordings sounded like old recordings just immediately. Just incredible. So one more very important thing to go over when it comes to psychedelic guitar tones, and Jimi Hendrix is really a pioneer of this, by using the modulation effects such as the crybaby and the wah in the early days. You know, he would use this wah effect through the overdrive of the Marshall amplifiers, and this modulation effect before the overdrive, it gives you this really cool psychedelic sound. And this is something that has actually been, you know, it's part of music evolution and has actually incorporated itself now into electronic music styles with the invention of acid techno. And it's where they modulate the frequency response before the overdrive, and it comes up with this very cool psychedelic sound. And this is something that is very experimental with guitar tones. And if you could imagine, like, a Stratocaster already has a very thin sound. So then when you use another additional frequency elimination like a wah, it really does, it has a tendency to become even thinner. And so for the wah, actually the Super PA may not be the best thing unless it does have the super bass circuit. And that's actually what makes the super bass really unbeatable for the use of the wah-wah pedal. It's because it has such a bass frequency response. It's just going to sound more full with a wah-wah, which is naturally, obviously going to sound just too thin with a super lead or even a Super PA. Okay, so just a little bit about the worm here in this video today. We did try the worm before the equalizer and the boost, and we like it better after the equalizer and the boost. And the worm definitely seems to warm up the signal a good bit, and that's important with the Fender guitars because they can become squealy and microphonic. In this video, we use the wah setting as well as the phaser setting and even the tremolo setting. Now, the wah is a frequency modulation. The phaser is also a frequency modulation. The tremolo is supposed to be a volume modulation, and of course it is, but it seems to have some of the pitch modulation, and I'm not sure if it's bleeding through from the vibrato. But typically, I don't like the pitch modulation. And interesting enough, this pitch modulation and frequency modulation also was something that was found on the Univibe in the different settings with chorus and vibrato. And this is an analog effect, and you can tell because the light, you can see here how the light is fading, and the new digital effects just don't do that. And it has a great frequency response. This pedal also has auto and manual settings, allowing you to adjust the range here. And it's more noticeable on the wah-wah. If you put the range all the way up, it gets very bright, but then you can roll it back and it won't go quite as high. And then I guess the only other thing to say is that because it's 24 volts, it seems to be, it's just something about 24 volts. It seems to be able to drive the amp. And then as far as the overdrive, we're really not sure because we have most of the bands on the equalizer turned all the way up and the equalizer turned up. So we're not sure if some of the overdrive is actually coming from the pedal and maybe possibly the preamp tubes in the amp. And the reason why we're not sure is because when the output tubes start breaking up, they more or less cover up everything else, and so it makes it a little hard to tell. Thanks for watching, and check our channel for our latest videos.